Chapter 1268. There were only a few dozen first-class media outlets. Now that half of them had left, the seats were empty. It inevitably made people feel cold. It wouldn't look good if word got out that they had made up the numbers at the last minute. Yi Liangqiu paused for a moment and looked at Jia. Change it to an exclusive interview. If possible, we can do a live broadcast and find someone to watch it. I think the response should be better than the original effect. Jia originally had such an idea, but she was afraid that Yi Liangqiu wouldn't be willing or couldn't control such a scene. But now, she didn't have such doubts at all, so she immediately reported it to Qin Anlin. Qin Anlin muttered to himself for a moment before agreeing. During the live broadcast, the popular host, Nana, was invited to talk to Yi Liangqiu about her recent plans. At first, Sister Ying and Qin Anlin thought that with Yi Liangqiu's personality, she would probably walk the cold and aloof path. But when they thought about it, she was very approachable. Her gaze in front of the camera was indescribably warm. It immediately reminded them of the last scene of The Gentle Breeze. I think this movie should be considered as a natural performance. Yi Liangqiu tilted her head and looked at Nana. Yes, I might be a little timid when it comes to relationships. If I don't dare to tell him, I might just wait where I am. As Yi Liangqiu spoke, he also smiled slightly. It's just like the role in Qing Fengshuli's movie. Because the male lead's halo is too dazzling, I might not have the courage to fight for it. After saying this, she was also sad. Nana was stunned for a moment, but she quickly adjusted and continued to ask, then, has our Liangqiu met such a male lead in life? Yi Liangqiu lowered her eyes for a long time before she looked up at the camera, but Qin Anlin was also in the direction of the camera, so her eyes met with his. At that moment, his body trembled. Soon, her eyes were fixed on the camera, and she smiled calmly. Yes, but you should be relieved now. He felt relieved. Hearing her words, Qin Anlin felt that he should be relieved. But for some reason, from now on, he kind of hated Yi Liangqiu. He didn't know the reason, but he just hated it. Nana was very good at following up. She quickly smiled and said, Liangqiu's words must have resonated with many in the audience. I believe that we have all liked someone before. Perhaps he is high and mighty, but that doesn't stop us from liking him. However, if one day he enters our lives, we will discover that reality isn't so beautiful. Because of the difference, we are destined to be unable to walk together. The image froze on Yi Liangqiu's face. There was a hint of regret and melancholy on her face. However, Qin Anlin knew that all of this was no longer for him, but for the script of the live broadcast. She was damn good. After the live broadcast ended, the director team started to celebrate. This live broadcast had more than 5 million viewers, breaking the records of many A-list celebrities. However, Qin Anlin's face was gloomy as he called Yi Liangqiu away. Jia was worried and reminded her carefully, President Qin doesn't look good, don't provoke him. Yi Liangqiu nodded and walked out briskly, even saying goodbye to Nana. Chapter 1269. Jia couldn't say too much, so she just smiled and said, maybe it's because of my period. Her words were suggestive, because everyone knew that President Qin hadn't had many scandals recently. Nana covered her mouth and laughed. Jia, you're so vicious. As she said that, she patted Sister Ying's arm and said, your company has dug up a treasure. I've never seen anyone who has been in retirement for a few years and can still be so popular when they make a comeback. If they can produce another 1 or 2 good films, they'll be able to become an A-lister. Jia nodded and said, it's a pity for the past few years. But she changed the topic. She suddenly became popular a few years ago, so it's good for her to retire. After all, she was young at that time and wasn't used to the Vanity Fair. It's just right now. After all, she was only 23 years old, which was still very young. Nana thought about it and lowered her voice. Did you notice that she looks a lot like Lin Qingsha when she was young? She doesn't look very outstanding at first glance, but her facial features and figure are impeccable. Jia smiled and said, that's because you like her. She's good no matter how you look at her. You don't like her? Nana smiled and said, I've never seen you help a newcomer like this, Jia. Jia didn't say anything. She just smiled and saw Nana off. When she turned around, Yi Liangqiu hadn't come down yet. She sent a message to Kaim and asked him to keep an eye on her. At this moment, Qin Anlin and Yi Liangqiu were standing in his office together. He was smoking with his back to her. Yi Liangqiu looked at his tense back and thought of what Jia had said in private. She agreed with him. Qin Anlin was probably having a bad period, so he had a weird temper. It was better for her not to get into trouble. He smoked half a cigarette before turning around and saying in a hoarse voice, how does it feel to use your past to please the public, Ms. Yi? He stared at her, not letting go of any expression on her face. Yi Liangqiu didn't have much expression on her face. After a while, she said softly, President Qin thinks too much. He slowly walked over, approaching step by step. She retreated step by step until she reached the door and pressed her body against it. His body was tightly pressed against hers. She could only restrain herself to prevent her sensitive parts from touching him. However, the more she did this, the more her senses were magnified. Even the contact of a single pore was enough to make her tremble. His hands were on top of her head, trapping her. She couldn't move. Am I thinking too much? He lowered his face and was very, very close to her, so close that they could see themselves in each other's eyes. Yi Liangqiu tilted her head slightly, as if she was sending her lips to his. As long as he spoke, he would be able to kiss her. Of course, this is all scripted. She looked at him fearlessly. Even though her back was sweating, her legs were weak, and even though she knew that her body was slightly changing because of his contact, she still looked very calm. Qin Anlin trapped her with one hand and slowly moved his other hand down from her shoulder to her arm. Little by little, the back of his hand occasionally brushed against places that shouldn't be brushed. They both trembled at the same time. His gaze was unfathomable and indescribable. However, he continued to move down, grabbed her hand, and slowly felt a small notebook in her hand. Chapter 1270. He took it over and still held her captive as he read through it quickly. As he read, his expression turned ugly. It turned out that every answer she gave was carefully planned. It turned out that the so-called past that she mentioned had nothing to do with him, Qin Anlin. He felt as if his face had been ruthlessly slapped, and it was burning with pain. How could she not see that he was angry out of humiliation? So she said calmly, President Qin, let bygones be bygones. There's no need to bring it up again. She looked at him. I think to President Qin, sleeping pills and pillows have expiration dates. Once they're over, they're over. I'm not the only one, so I won't think about it. President Qin, please don't take it to heart. She said it coldly, as if she was reminding him. The other side of Qin Anlin's face seemed to have been slapped by her again. He narrowed his eyes and looked at her. Have you forgotten everything? Yes. She said resolutely. He let go of her and turned to walk to the French window. He stood there and looked at the scenery of B City. After a while, he said, It's good that you've forgotten. Yi Liangqiu, there are still some clothes for you there. Go and get them when you have time. She nodded. I will. She was so determined without a trace of reluctance. It made him hate her even more. He suddenly turned around and looked at her with a sneer. Yi Liangqiu, you've turned your life into acting. You're a natural actress. President Qin, you're flattering me. It's better than President Qin acting without knowing it, she replied. He glared at her because of her disrespect. Yi Liangqiu looked at him indifferently. When I'm insulted, I'll retaliate, no matter who it is. What she didn't say was that if it was anyone else, she would have judged the situation. However, Qin Anlin, I told myself in my heart that I will never lower my head to you again, I will never beg you again. What I want, I will ask you for it openly. I will fight for it. I will never kneel at your feet and beg for it again. This was probably her self-esteem. Qin Anlin's voice was a little tense. I'll wait for you to get it tonight. All right. But I don't want to see a woman there, she said bluntly. President Qin, I don't think it's difficult to respect each other, right? When she said this, he remembered that she had seen Shen Lian in his house on the day she left. In reality, there was nothing between him and Shen Lian. Perhaps at that time, he still couldn't let it go, but now, it was even less likely that he would. Shen Lian was now focused on dealing with Pei Qiqi. How would she have the time to look for him? However, in his opinion, she was daydreaming. Did she think that after Pei Qiqi left, it would be her turn? Thinking of Pei Qiqi, he compared her to Yi Liangqiu. He was a little confused. In the end, he smiled. Pei Qiqi's personality was a little cuter. The woman in front of him, on the other hand, only knew how to be rude. He thought that he was willing to tolerate her bad temper because he wanted her to become a superstar. However, he had never thought that Yi Liangqiu was willing to return to the entertainment industry today, which meant that she had already put down her pride. In front of him, she was uncompromising and disrespectful. Just like a child, the more she had a crush on someone, the more arrogant she would be in front of that person. Yi Liangqiu was like this, and so was Qin Anlin. He thought that he liked Pei Qiqi, but when he first saw Pei Qiqi, he thought of Yi Liangqiu. Chapter 1271. That night, Yi Liangqiu asked Auntie Zhang to go to his apartment, but she couldn't get it because Qin Anlin wanted Yi Liangqiu to get it herself. Auntie Zhang was from City H. When she returned, she said to Yi Liangqiu, "That guy is really handsome, but he's too cold. I think he likes Miss Yi." Yi Liangqiu saw that she didn't have anything in her hands and knew that Auntie Zhang didn't get it. She forced a smile and didn't say anything. She didn't want it anymore. Not long after she returned to King Entertainment, Sister Ing helped her take on 2 shows. One was a commercial film, and the other was an artistic film like The Gentle Breeze Blows. However, the 2 shows were filmed almost at the same time, so it was tough. When Yi Liangqiu left, she was worried about Mu Yun. Auntie Zhang said that it would be fine to leave him to her, so she was willing to leave. On one hand, if she brought him near the set and something happened to Mu Yun, she wouldn't be able to save him. After thinking about it, she decided to leave Mu Yun in the care of Auntie Zhang and Dr. Lin. Dr. Lin was in his 30s and had always treated Mu Yun well. She thought about it and felt relieved. In the car to Hingdian, Ying Jia looked at her and said gently, "Why? Are you worried about Mu Yun?" These few years, Ying Jia had watched Mu Yun grow up. She would visit the south when she was free. She didn't get married and had children, so Mu Yun was like her godson. Yi Liangqiu nodded and looked out of the car window. She said softly, "Ying Jia, if it wasn't for Mu Yun, I don't think I would have come back." She liked the peace of the south, the place without Qin Anlin. If she could, she didn't want to face him again in this life. How could Sister Ing not know what she was thinking? She could only sigh in her heart and did not say much. "Ying Jia, don't worry. I won't get hurt again." Yi Liangqiu's voice was a little low. "I won't get hurt if I don't have expectations." Ying Jia felt sad for her. There was nothing wrong with Liangqiu, nor did she do anything wrong. She just fell in love with someone she shouldn't have. She pondered for a moment before saying, there have been a lot of newcomers in the company recently. I think Pei Huan has potential, but he doesn't have the right intentions. It's hard for him to achieve anything. Ying Jia spoke with reservation. In her heart, she still believed that President Qin and Liang Qiu still had hope. Therefore, she never mentioned anything about Qin Anlin. How could Yi Liangqiu not know that she wanted to do this? She had only been back in the company for a few days, but Mo Xiaoqi had already counted about a dozen newcomers in front of her. They were all the harem that Qin Anlin had doted on. In the end, Mo Xiaoqi said to her, Yi Liangqiu, actually, we are no different. In President Qin's heart, we are all commodities, not women. Yeah, how could she not know that? She knew it better than anyone else. Yi Liangqiu thought about it and smiled. Ying Jia, you don't have to hide it from me. Even if you don't tell me, someone else will. From the beginning to the end, only Kaim and Ying Jia knew about her and Qin Anlin. She knew Ying Jia's feelings, but some things were not mished, but simply impossible. Ying Jia didn't say much. She sighed and said, you decide. Yi Liangqiu nodded and the two of them didn't talk anymore. When she arrived at Hingdian, the days of filming would be tough, especially since she had to deal with both sides. Chapter 1272. Yi Liangqiu didn't care. The harder she worked, the more time she could spend with Mu Yun. During the 3 months of filming, she could see Qin Anlin's news every 2 days. Not surprisingly, he appeared together with Su Qing. After Su Qing debuted, she had been involved in a scandal with Qin Anlin. They appeared together today to go shopping, tomorrow to attend the opening ceremony, and the day after that, they appeared in the hotel together. Scandals were everywhere. It was hard for Yi Liangqiu not to know. Ying Jia expressed her dissatisfaction. President Qin is flattering others. What is this? Does he want to surpass you? Ying Jia didn't want to be outdone. She directly released the scandal between Yi Liangqiu and Qin Anlin. It was very vague that Su Qing had stolen her love, so Yi Liangqiu avoided the pain of love and went to a small city in the south. As soon as she returned to the entertainment circle, Su Qing began to make trouble again. All of this made Yi Liangqiu unable to bear it, and her heart was heavy. Of course, the fans were unwilling. They went to Su Cheng's Weibo to scold her, saying that she was shameless, and that she was scheming. When Yi Liangqiu saw the gossip, she was shocked. She looked at Ying Jia and asked, you did it? Ying Jia admitted it generously. Yes. I did it. Do I have to watch that woman make trouble? It's obvious that she did it for you, so I'll do it a little more. Yi Liangqiu looked down at the script. As long as President Qin doesn't look for us, it's fine. Ying Jia didn't care. Don't admit it. Just push it to the fans. You have so many fans, and there are many people with wild imaginations. Yi Liangqiu pursed her lips and looked at her. Finally, she smiled. Ying Jia, you are such a rascal. Ying Jia also smiled. This is also something that I have comprehended after so many years. Little girl, learn it. Ying Jia added, President Qin will probably look for you tonight, to settle the score. Think about what you're going to say. Yi Liangqiu looked down at the script in her hands and said calmly, I didn't do it, and I don't know who did it. You're a fast learner. Ying Jia smiled with satisfaction. To survive in this circle, one had to have no morals. As soon as they finished talking, they received a call from Qin Anlin. Yi Liangqiu looked at Ying Jia, smiled, and picked up the phone. On the other side, Qin Anlin's tone was a little cold. He said in a completely businesslike tone, have you seen the content of the news? Is it about you and Su Qing? Yi Liangqiu was still looking at the script while talking to him. She hummed, "Congratulations, President Qin." Her tone was very sincere. But in Qin Anlan's ears, it was extremely sarcastic. His voice became colder. "Did you do it?" "What?" Yi Liangqiu asked lazily. "Who is President Qin with? And you're asking if I did it?" She was a complete rascal, and he couldn't do anything about it. She didn't even admit what had happened and pretended not to know. Qin Anlan's voice was a little hoarse. "Do you want me to be with someone else that much?" This sentence more or less tugged at Yi Liangqiu's heartstrings. She held the phone and didn't speak for a long time. After a long time, she said softly, "President Qin, I don't think we need to talk about such a personal topic." "I think so, too." Qin Anlan's voice became colder. "My relationship with Su Qing is just like that. How it was in the past will be how it will be in the future." Was he explaining it to her? Yi Liangqiu's breathing was a little erratic and rapid. Chapter 1273. Yi Liangqiu's fingers slowly slid down the phone. After she put it down, she looked at Ing Jia and said, "He's angry." "Of course he's angry." Ing Jia smiled. "Then, let him be angry. This wouldn't change anything." Instead, it made President Qin worry about Liangqiu even more. Ing Jia did this as a test. Seeing how angry President Qin was, he probably didn't feel relieved. Yi Liangqiu closed the script and smiled. "I'm going out. It's my time." Ing Jia also went out with her. Although Yi Liangqiu didn't come from an acting school, she was very perceptive and looked good on camera. Director Zhang said that she was born to be fed by the ancestors. Director Zhang was very satisfied with the film, seeing the stars. He said that Yi Liangqiu had shown the faithfulness of women in that period. Director Zhang was very confident in this film and was ready to use her to win various awards. The other commercial film was a warring period film, and Yi Liangqiu was definitely the female lead. The momentum was very good, especially since the owner was a big film company and the production was very big. Half a year later, it was Yi Liangqiu's time. Her two films swept the box office of the entire Chinese New Year period, and the two films combined exceeded 5 billion yuan. Moreover, Yi Liangqiu was crazily sought after at all the major film festivals, especially the media, who said that she was another superstar after Lin Qingxiu. Yi Liangqiu was very busy. She was busy with all the major film festivals and was busy accepting endorsements. She had accepted more than 10 international endorsements, and for a while, she was in the limelight. Therefore, she could only see Qin Anlan once every 2 or 3 months. After a long time, she got used to it, and he seemed to have forgotten about her. He only remembered the heavenly Queen Yi, not Yi Liangqiu. Yi Liangqiu was busy for a while, and when she really had some free time, it was already 2 years later. In these 2 years, she had filmed 4 movies, and not a single TV show. She became the #1 celebrity with an annual income of 200 million. She had long passed the time when she needed to struggle. This year, Yi Liangqiu was 25 years old. Yi Muyun was 5 years old. That night was the end of the year for King Entertainment and their collaboration with ATV. Yi Liangqiu didn't want to attend at first. She just wanted to stay at home and accompany Mu Yun. She was worried that Mu Yun had not been feeling well for the past 2 days. However, Ing Jia later specially informed her to participate in this event, saying that she had to show her face no matter what. She reluctantly agreed. The evening gown she chose was a black V-neck. The front was considered conservative, but the back was almost completely exposed. It was very dazzling. Ing Jia wailed, "Do you have to do this?" She had never seen Liangqiu wear such a killer weapon. Yi Liangqiu smiled and looked at Ing Jia. Didn't you say that I'm usually too conservative? Jia didn't say anything. The two of them arrived at the venue. When the black limousine came out, it caused a burst of screams. Every scream was called Yi Liangqiu's name. Yi Liangqiu. Yi Liangqiu. Yi Liangqiu gave them a slight signal, and they strangely calmed down. They turned to look at their idols in silence. Jia smiled. No wonder they call you hubby. Liangqiu's beauty was not only gentle, but also had a rare heroic spirit, but it was not masculine. When walking the red carpet, Yi Liangqiu and Jia walked alone. She didn't need any male companions, because she alone was enough to support. Both sides of the red carpet were filled with reporters, their cameras aimed in this direction. Chapter 1274. Don't you look too plain? Other people can't wait to get a few more styles to impress you. Jia whispered. Yi Liangqiu's voice was a little low. She smiled and said, I don't need to impress anyone now. As she spoke, Sister Ing tilted her head and looked over. She was also stunned. The Yi Liangqiu today was not the Yi Liangqiu from 2 years ago, nor was she the little girl from 6 years ago. Yi Liangqiu held Jia's hand. I just need to hold Jia's hand. For a moment, Jia was very touched. You bad girl. Jia's voice was unsteady. You always make me sad. Yi Liangqiu smiled faintly. I thought you would be happier now. Jia sighed. Yes. I am happy. The little girl she had brought up was unparalleled now. She was a well-deserved diva. Jia looked at Yi Liangqiu and wanted to say something but stopped. There were some things she wanted to tell Liangqiu, but she didn't know how to say it. After hesitating for a long time, she still couldn't say it. In the end, she thought it was better to let President Qin tell her. When the two were about to enter the hotel, there was a commotion on the red carpet. Yi Liangqiu looked sideways and saw Su Qing and Qin Anlin. They had been together for the past 2 years. Yi Liangqiu heard that Su Qing was the daughter-in-law of Qin Anlin's mother, so it was not strange that they were together. She didn't look at them and walked into the hall. She took a glass of whiskey from the waiter and drank half of it. Jia reminded her in a low voice, don't get drunk now. If you lose your composure, the reporters will write nonsense. Jia sighed in her heart. Liangqiu didn't seem to care, but she had never let it go. If she had let it go, she wouldn't have drunk such strong alcohol. Usually, no matter what the occasion was, she was always cautious and never touched such things. When Yi Liangqiu heard this, she looked down at the wine in her glass and said in a low voice, help me back later. Jia glared at her. If you're dead drunk, I'll just leave you here. I won't care about you. Although she said that, her heart softened, and her voice became much gentler. Do you still want to go home? Will Mu Yun see it right away? Yi Liangqiu knew that she had nowhere to hide in front of Big Sister Ing. She was just about to speak when a melodious and sweet voice resounded by her ears. Big Sister Liangqiu, what are the two of you talking about? Yi Liangqiu and Jia were both stunned. They turned around and saw Qin Anlin and the little princess of ATV, Su Qing, standing behind them. Their backs were covered in cold sweat. How much did Qin Anlin hear just now? Su Cheng's eyes flashed with a sly look. She smiled and said, I have something to talk to Sister Liangqiu. Sister Liangqiu, I think you are free, okay? Yi Liangqiu saw a hint of threat in her eyes. She had no choice but to follow Su Qing to a corner. Jia looked at her boss and asked unhappily, President Qin, aren't you afraid that Liangqiu will bully your little girlfriend? Su Qing is not my little girlfriend. Qin Anlin frowned. Jia said with a smile, I know. President Qin likes President Tang's wife now, how immoral. Qin Anlan's face darkened. How dare you say that? It's true. Ing Jie said sarcastically. However, President Tang's little wife seems to have a similar temperament to our Liangqiu. Chapter 1275. This was her most obvious hint. President Qin clearly liked Yi Liangqiu, but he didn't know it himself. Qin Anlan looked at Ing Jie, pursed his lips and said unhappily, "Don't talk about it casually." Ing Jie smiled. Was she not allowed to talk about Liangqiu or President Tang's wife, Pei Qiqi? On the other side, Su Cheng and Yi Liangqiu stood side by side. Su Cheng took the wine glass from the waiter's hand and handed it to Yi Liangqiu. "Sister Liangqiu, you don't look happy." Yi Liangqiu took the glass from her hand, but didn't drink it. She just held it. Su Cheng smiled. "Why? Are you afraid that I've drugged it?" She smiled sweetly and looked like a little angel, but Yi Liangqiu knew that there was an evil soul in Su Cheng's heart. 2 years had passed, and Su Cheng hadn't done anything to her. She didn't even mention the existence of Mu Yun. She didn't understand. She didn't understand what Su Cheng was thinking. Yi Liangqiu looked at Su Cheng and smiled. "Why would I?" But she still didn't drink it. If she fell for such a little provocation, then she would have wasted the past few years. If there was one person in this world that she was extremely wary of, it would be Su Cheng. After Su Cheng entered the entertainment industry, Yi Liangqiu thought that she would compete with her, but it seemed that she didn't. Su Cheng seemed to like to hype up her and Qin Anlan scandals, and every time she did, she would bring Yi Liangqiu to the headlines. The three of them seemed to be tied together. As time passed, Yi Liangqiu should have let down her guard, but she didn't. Instead, she felt that Su Cheng was a mystery. She felt that what Su Cheng really wanted was her, Yi Liangqiu. She knew that in the past 2 years, Su Cheng had gone to look for Mu Yun. When Aunt Zhang took Mu Yun out, she went to play with Mu Yun and brought him toys. Mu Yun told her everything. Yi Liangqiu could not see through Su Cheng at all. At this time, she looked at Su Cheng through the crystal cup and said in a low voice, "Su Cheng, it's been 2 years. Are you done playing games?" Su Cheng still smiled sweetly. "Sister Liangqiu, are you impatient now? Don't play tricks with me." Yi Liangqiu's voice was a little cold. "I'm not interested in playing these childish games with you. If you want to play, you can go to Qin Anlan." At the mention of Qin Anlan, Su Cheng smiled a little playfully. She tilted her head and looked at Yi Liangqiu. "Sister Liangqiu, don't you love him the most? Aren't you afraid that I will hurt him? If you can hurt him, go ahead." Yi Liangqiu's voice became colder. "It has nothing to do with me." "Oh, what if I sleep with him?" Su Cheng smiled sweetly. "Sister Liangqiu, don't you care?" Yi Liangqiu's eyes fell on Su Cheng's wine cup. Her wine cup reflected a slender figure, a figure that made her suffocate. Yi Liangqiu also smiled softly. She tilted her head and looked at Su Cheng. "It doesn't matter. I don't care." "Really?" There was a low and hoarse voice behind her. It was Qin Anlan. Su Cheng immediately smiled sweetly and held Qin Anlan's arm with both hands. "Anlan go." Qin Anlan looked at Yi Liangqiu, but he said to Su Cheng, "Your father has arrived. Go and say hello, oh." Chapter 1276. A smile appeared on Yi Liangqiu's face. What a little girl's trick. After Su Cheng left, Yi Liangqiu looked at the glass in her hand and suddenly tilted her head to drink it. The spicy wine slid down her throat, and the throb made her tremble. Qin Anlan narrowed his eyes and looked at her. "Is that so? It doesn't matter who I sleep with." Yi Liangqiu put down the glass and leaned against the sofa lazily. She looked at Qin Anlin and smiled. Qin Anlin, won't you sleep if it matters? She was starting to feel dizzy. There were 2 of him, 4 of him, so many of him. She groped for the sofa and sat down, but it felt like she was sitting on a boat. She felt seasick. Her fingers dug into the back of the sofa. She wiped her red lips and gently said a long list of names. Qin Anlin's expression changed slightly. He leaned forward and looked into her eyes. Isn't it unrelated? Why do you remember it so clearly? Yi Liangqiu's skin was porcelain white. Looking closely, he realized that she had only put on some honey powder. Her skin was smooth and translucent. She opened her eyes. Her long eyelashes fluttered, and when she blinked, they seemed to be overflowing with colors. At this moment, she was devastatingly beautiful. At this moment, she was like an exquisite work of art. Qin Anlin's eyes were locked on her face. After a long time, he said, "Are you drunk?" She smiled lightly. Her hand was on the armrest of the sofa, and her heart was heaving up and down. She looked at Qin Anlin and leaned close to his ear. She said in a low voice, "It was Su Qing who gave me the wine." Qin Anlin's eyes were cold. He grabbed her arm and said coldly, "Come with me." Her body was very hot, and he was shocked. "I don't want to go with you." She smiled lightly, and there was a touch of coldness on her face. Qin Anlin pursed his lips and forcefully grabbed her wrist and pulled her up. He passed through the bustling hall, everyone, and Su Qing, who had a confused expression on her face. Su Qing looked at Yi Liangqiu's strange look and was shocked. There was nothing wrong with that glass of wine. It was just a little strong. Even if he drank a cup, he wouldn't lose his composure like this. How could this be? When Qin Anlin passed by Su Qing, he glared at her and restrained himself from saying goodbye to Mr. Su. At this moment, there was only Yi Liangqiu in his heart. He was afraid that she would lose her composure and cause a scandal. Yi Liangqiu was half hugged and half carried by him as they walked out. When they passed by Su Qing, she winked at her. She also knew how to play little tricks. At that moment, Su Cheng's expression turned ugly. She narrowed her eyes and looked in the direction where they had left. What would they do? What would Qin Anlin do to Yi Liangqiu? No, no, no. Su Cheng's eyes showed a touch of viciousness. How could he do that? That was hers, and no one was allowed to touch it. She had made a mistake once before, and they had a child. But she couldn't do it again. Qin Anlin helped Yi Liangqiu into the car. She was lying on her side in the back seat, and she seemed to be asleep. The white evening dress covered the back seat, and there was a kind of stunning beauty. Qin Anlin paused and looked at her deeply. After a while, he closed the car door and sat in the front seat. He called Ing Jia to tell her that he had taken her away. Before Ing Jia could react, he had already hung up the phone. The car window rolled down slowly. He opened the rearview mirror, and the scene in the back seat was reflected. After looking at it for a while, he pursed his lips and started the car. Chapter 1277. When he opened the car door, she was still lying there, covered in sweat. Qin Anlin picked her up. Her hair had already spread out and reached her waist, contrasting with her white dress. In such a dark night, it was as if he was carrying a long-haired princess. Every step he took seemed to be followed by countless magic fairies. As soon as he moved, she woke up. She slowly opened her eyes, and there was a hint of desire in her beautiful and enchanting eyes. That expression made Qin Anlin tremble. He did not know how long it had been since he had such an urge. Making love to a woman seemed to be a process. It was not something he wanted, but it was to relieve his boredom. But she was so beautiful that he had the urge to fiercely kiss her lips, to fiercely take her. He did not even know why he had brought her back. It was obvious that it was the best choice to leave her with Jia. Perhaps it was because she was too beautiful at the moment. He would not feel at ease even if he were to leave her with someone of the same gender. In the elevator, she began to feel restless. Her slender arms hung around his neck, and she called him Anlin softly, "Are you okay?" His voice was extremely hoarse. Yi Liangqiu bit her lips. She bit her lips lightly, and it was as if she could bleed. Her red lips were tempting to taste. Hot, uncomfortable. Her little hands hugged him tightly, and her face was nestled against his neck. She was like a little bird rubbing against an old bird. At this moment, she was as soft as cotton and very light. She was very tall, but in his arms, she felt very small. In fact, he could remember that she was indeed very small. Especially when he wanted her, he also felt a little pain. Qin Anlin pursed his lips and narrowed his eyes. He looked at her, and his heart was in a dilemma. She was very uncomfortable, and so was he. Could they be together so that it would not be so uncomfortable? He did not know who kissed who first. They kissed passionately in the elevator. There was not a single gap between their lips and tongues. It was the same for their bodies. They hugged each other and stumbled against the wall of the elevator. It was so violent that the elevator shook a little, but neither of them could care less. Qin Anlin kissed her greedily. The wonderful taste made him reluctant to let go. His big palm moved up her waist, stirring up a wave of heat. Qin Anlin. She called out his name softly and raised her head to receive his overly passionate kiss. He followed her soft skin, from her neck to her lips. Her hands were raised above her head, and her body was firmly pressed against him. Separated by a layer of clothes, he began to do the most embarrassing thing. Even if she didn't drink any aphrodisiac, the wine was enough to arouse her. Perhaps what moved her was the man in front of her. Yi Liangqiu realized that she had gone too far. She had only wanted to frustrate Su Qing, but now it seemed that it was difficult for her to extricate herself. He rubbed against her bit by bit, so he could naturally feel the changes in her. At this time, the elevator door opened. Ding! There was also someone outside. Yi Liangqiu subconsciously buried her face in his neck. The person outside happened to be playing with his phone. When he saw Yi Liangqiu, he recognized him and quickly took a picture. Qin Anlin's thin lips were tightly pressed together. He wanted to step out, but the elevator door had closed. That person did not come up. Did he take a picture? Yi Liangqiu looked up and asked softly. Qin Anlin did not say a word. He just held her little face and kissed her forcefully. Once they reached the apartment, he held her shoulders and kissed her without restraint. Chapter 1278. Their bodies hugged each other as they stumbled to the sofa. Qin Anlin looked at her beauty from above. His gaze was almost worshipping. Her rare beauty had faded over time. At this moment, there was poison under his body. Little by little, he kissed her brows, her eyes, her lips, her little neck. He was unbelievably gentle. Yi Liangqiu received his gentleness, but not his heart. Fortunately, she didn't put her heart on him. Otherwise, wouldn't she be heartbroken again? She chuckled and lifted her neck. Her voice was trembling as she said, "Qin Anlin, itchy." He continued kissing her. Every time he kissed a spot, he would ask her in a husky voice, "Is it itchy here?" He was probably too passionate and forgot himself. He had done things to her that he had never done to a woman before. Only God knew that he never served women. Yi Liangqiu raised her head. From where he was looking, her body was extremely beautiful. It was extremely similar to the layers of the most beautiful mountain peaks. her body suddenly went limp and she panted. Qin Anlin, enough. Her eyes were a little wet as she looked at his passionate look. So this was how Qin Anlin looked when he was desperate. He didn't seem to hear her and continued kissing her without a care. Yi Liangqiu pursed her lips and smiled lightly. Qin Anlin, I'm serious. She sat up slightly and looked at his eyes. She looked clear. I don't want it. She didn't want it, but he wanted it. When a man was teased to this extent, asking him to stop was tantamount to killing him. Especially when he was facing such a beautiful woman. Qin Anlin looked up and supported himself with his arms. He moved forward and kissed her lips fiercely. His voice was swallowed by his teeth. Be good, don't move. She kicked him and was held down by him forcefully. Yi Liangqiu, I can't stop. His dark eyes were locked on her beauty. Her gown was half off, and she looked like Venus. Only, she wasn't incomplete, she was perfect. Qin Anlin held his belt with one hand and locked her hand with the other, forcing her to undo his own. Aren't you afraid that I'll pester you? Actually, she didn't care. She didn't love him anymore. So what if they had sex? It was just a one-night stand. Qin Anlin lowered his body to kiss her. Then wrap your body around me first. His heart was clear now, and he even felt that this was pretty good. If she said she wanted him to marry her, then he would marry her. He was like a hot knife through butter. She was powerless to resist. In the end, she could only press her lips against his and whisper, "Go to the bedroom." Qin Anlin carried her into the master bedroom and threw her onto the bed. He untied his tie and his shirt fell to the ground. She picked up the photo frame from the bedside table and stroked it gently with her fingers. She looked up and said, Qin Anlin, have you forgotten about our safety zone? His expression changed slightly, and he looked at her stiffly for a long time. Finally, he sat down, took out a cigarette from his trouser pocket and lit it up. You did it on purpose. Yes. I faked it. Her voice was a little faint. I was drunk at first, but I woke up in the car. Why? He looked at her deeply, not letting go of any expression on her face. Yi Liangqiu chuckled. I just felt that my relationship with President Qin wasn't very interesting, so I wanted to adjust it. She didn't mean what she said. Chapter 1279. She might not believe it if he said it out loud, but there had never been anything between him and Su Qing. There was nothing in his heart. Besides, Qin Anlin had never felt that Su Qing was interested in him. From the beginning to the end, the person who was the most enthusiastic about their relationship was probably his mother. He didn't want to get married, but with Su Qing as a barrier, he was happy to do it. He felt that he was waiting for someone. That person wasn't Shen Lian, he thought it was Pei Qi. Therefore, he had always been single. He also thought that he would not be interested in women other than Pei Qi in the future because he had not been looking for a woman recently. However, he had overestimated himself. He had wanted Yi Liangqiu like a madman. He had completely forgotten about Pei Qi's existence. Smoking, he looked at her and said, "Sleep here for the night." Just like in the past, the two of them lived together peacefully. Yi Liangqiu looked at him quietly. She pursed her lips and said in a low voice, "I want to go home." Home. He smiled faintly. This used to be your home. Have you forgotten? She looked up at him. After a long time, she smiled lightly and said, "Don't you think it's ironic? This place had never been her home. She was just a passerby. This house was hers, and so was Qin Anlin's." Qin Anlin narrowed his eyes and looked at her. After a long time, Qin Anlin said, "I'll send you to the office tomorrow." She wanted to say something, but Qin Anlin had already made up his mind. He walked into the bathroom and took a shower. Yi Liangqiu leaned against the headboard. Her gaze fell on the photo frame for a long time. At this moment, she even needed a cigarette. But she didn't smoke. She had Mu Yun. No matter how distressed she was, she wouldn't touch cigarettes or alcohol to relieve her stress. Looking around, the place was still the same as before. The decorations were cold and hard, without a hint of femininity. He did not know if this was a good thing or a bad thing. As Yi Liangqiu was thinking, the phone in her handbag rang. She took it out and looked at it. It was Aunt Zhang. Aunt Zhang's voice was a little anxious. "Miss Yi, come back quickly. Mu Yun fell and his head is a little broken." "Is there a lot of blood?" Yi Liangqiu had already stood up and casually pulled her clothes. Her voice was even more anxious than Auntie Zhang's. Aunt Zhang hesitated for a moment. "No. I called Dr. Lin to come over." Yi Liangqiu walked outside and said, "Observe for a while longer. If it doesn't work, inform those two." Those two people were Mu Yun's blood bank. Aunt Zhang nodded. Yi Liangqiu had already reached the door. She placed her hand on the doorknob and pulled the door open. At this moment, there was only Mu Yun in her heart, nothing else. Even Qin Anlin was not affected at all. His voice rang out from behind her, "It's already so late. Are you going back dressed like this?" She paused and turned around slowly. He was wearing a white bathrobe, just like how she had seen him before. Yi Liangqiu pursed her lips. "Then lend me a car." He looked at her and frowned slightly. Then he looked at her and asked, "There's a man?" "Yes." She did not deny it. Instead, she admitted it. Qin Anlin stared at her for a long time. Finally, he took out a car key and handed it to her. "The one I drove just now." Yi Liangqiu took it, thanked him softly, and then walked out quickly. Chapter 1280. He couldn't help but recall the time when he had hugged her. At that time, she had been lying in his car, dazzlingly beautiful and infinitely luxurious. Qin Anlin pursed his lips. Suddenly, a strange feeling arose in his heart. He suddenly felt that there was something wrong with her just now. He went out in his bathrobe and went straight to the underground car park. But when he reached the underground car park, Yi Liangqiu's car had already started and was driving towards the exit. He ran a few steps and the car had already left. Qin Anlin stood where he had been, his expression a little ugly and his gaze was even more distant. He had to admit that he had been played by her tonight. As for the reason, it was probably partly because of Su Qing, and partly because Yi Liangqiu still hated him. He looked at her for a long time, and finally, he slowly walked back. Tonight, he was accompanied by a glass of red wine and a sleepless night. He didn't know how long it had been since he had a good sleep. The last time seemed to be 5 or 6 years ago. At that time, Yi Liangqiu was still here. He smiled bitterly, his phone rang. He reached out to take it. It was a call from Su Qing. "Why are you calling me at this hour?" Qin Anlin's tone was a little indifferent. Su Qing's voice was very delicate. "Anlin Gu, how are you and Sister Liangqiu?" Qin Anlin's tone was a little indifferent. "She's gone. I thought that Anlin Gu liked her very much." Su Qing's voice had always been delicate and unguarded. Qin Anlin had always treated her like a sister. Except for the incident with Yi Sun, she had done nothing wrong. He had asked Su Qing about the incident with Yi Sun, and Su Qing had managed to fool him. He didn't pursue the matter, because if Yi Liangqiu wanted to do something, she would have had the opportunity and the ability to fight against Su Qing. But after so many years, they still lived in harmony. She is King Entertainment, or rather, the most popular female celebrity in Asia. Ching Ching, don't mess around. Qin Anlan's voice was slightly cold, a warning. Su Ching smiled lightly. Of course I won't mess around. You're the person Anlan Gu likes. Qin Anlan listened to her words and felt that it was a little weird, but he couldn't tell what was weird about it. Su Ching stuck out her tongue and said briskly over the phone, Anlan Gu, tonight's program was really good. It's a pity that you went back early. Qin Anlan smiled faintly. The programs in the past years are similar. Su Ching didn't say anything more and hung up the phone. She looked at the phone in her hand and smiled playfully. It seemed that nothing had happened between them. It wasn't Anlan Gu who wasn't willing, but Yi Liangqiu. Thinking of Yi Liangqiu, Su Ching looked at the phone again. That phone call was just a little insurance. 10 p.m. Yi Liangqiu rushed back to the villa. Dr. Lin had already arrived and checked on him. He said that Mu Yun had only bumped into himself lightly and there were no wounds. It would be fine. She heaved a sigh of relief and sent Dr. Lin out. Dr. Lin's white sports car stopped at the entrance and she walked out with him. She didn't know how beautiful she looked in her white gown, especially when she walked across the lawn. Under the moonlight, she looked like a moon goddess. Dr. Lin had known her for several years. He had seen her grow from a young girl in her 20s to a beautiful 25-year-old. Chapter 1281. Dr. Lin was a little moved and his heart pounded. His heart, which had never pounded for a woman, pounded violently. He knew that it was a feeling of love. However, it was unlikely that they would have the chance to be together. Dr. Lin knew that they belonged to two different worlds. However, as a man, he still admired her at this moment. After opening the car door, he suddenly turned around and looked at her with a burning gaze. Liangqiu, my suggestion is still the same. Find the child's father and have another child. The stem cell transplant will save Mu Yun from so much pain, and he won't have to bear unknown risks. Yi Liangqiu pursed her lips and said after a long while, I'll think of a way. Actually, she didn't want to beg Qin Anlan, and she didn't want to let herself and Mu Yun become so miserable. She didn't want to see Qin Anlan be shocked or even suspicious when he found out about Mu Yun's existence. At that time, her once love becomes so humble, becomes so insignificant. Dr. Lin was silent for a while. Because Mu Yun's blood type is special, others can't do anything about it. Perhaps, if it wasn't for this reason, he would have more courage. Yi Liangqiu looked at Dr. Lin for a long time before the corners of her lips twitched slightly. She looked up at the boundless moon. How long had it been since she could relax properly? Dr. Lin didn't say anything else, so he got into the car and drove away. Yi Liangqiu didn't feel nothing. Dr. Lin liked her, and he had liked her for many years. Dr. Lin had been by her side since she was 20 years old. At that time, Dr. Lin was 25 years old and had just graduated from medical school. Now, he was 30 years old. A man's best years. She wanted to talk to him if necessary, so that he didn't have to wait for her. She didn't have any expectations for love. She had given her love to the most honorable and most ruthless man in the world. She had given up everything for a little warmth, but he didn't want it. Yes, Qin Anlan knew that she liked him from the beginning. Yi Liangqiu stood in the dark for a long time. When she returned to the villa, it was already half an hour later. She changed her clothes and went to see Mu Yun. Mu Yun fell asleep while Aunt Zhang was taking care of him. Yi Liangqiu said lightly, I'll take care of him tonight. Aunt Zhang's voice was very uneasy, Miss Yi, I didn't mean to disturb you. Mu Yun is fine. What if he disturbs Miss Ye's career? Yi Liangqiu's salary was 20,000 yuan a month, which was impossible to get in other families. Aunt Zhang also attached great importance to this job. It's fine. Mu Yun's matter is the most important. Yi Liangqiu's tone was calm, without the slightest displeasure. Aunt Zhang breathed a sigh of relief. Yes, I was scared out of my wits. I'll be more careful in the future. After Auntie Zhang left, Yi Liangqiu sat there and looked in the direction Auntie Zhang had left. Aunt Zhang was a cautious person and would never make such a mistake. She didn't say it because she had never hurt Mu Yun. It was easy to imagine who was the one who did this. Yi Liangqiu lay down, turned her body sideways, and looked at Mu Yun's little face. Dr. Lin's words flashed in her mind. She was a little hesitant, even considering. Mu Yun bled from time to time, and she would be worried and heartbroken, the next afternoon, at the entrance of the ATV. Su Qing walked out of the building and waited for her assistant to drive the car over. Chapter 1282. At this moment, a white Bentley came to a stop in front of her. The car window wound down and Yi Liangqiu was sitting in the driver's seat. She wore a pair of black sunglasses and her expression was cold. Get in the car. Su Qing smiled faintly, bent over and waved at her. Sister Liangqiu. Yi Liangqiu felt that Su Qing was a bit of an idiot. They had a grudge against each other. Just because she did not lay a hand on Su Qing did not mean that she had forgotten about it. But Su Qing could still smile and call her sister Liangqiu when she looked at her. Su Qing got into the car and fastened her seatbelt. Her tone was even sweeter. Sister Liangqiu, where are we going? To a place where there's no one. Yi Liangqiu's tone was very calm. There, you can kill me, and I'll kill you. No one will know. For a long time, Su Qing did not reply to her. Yi Liangqiu sneered. Are you afraid? Su Qing tilted her head and smiled. Why would I? She leaned over. I really want to see how Sister Liangqiu looks like when you kill someone. Yi Liangqiu's pupils contracted. At that moment, she really wanted to kill Su Qing. She would never forget Yi Sun's death. As she drove, Su Qing played with her delicate fingernails playfully. She blew at them. Sister Liangqiu, some things are not as simple as they seem. This world is far dirtier than you think. Like what's behind your innocent smile? Yi Liangqiu's voice was very cold. Su Qing giggled. For Mu Yun. She looked indifferent and didn't care that Yi Liangqiu knew that Aunt Zhang had been bribed. She smiled gently. Sister Liangqiu, think about it. Aunt Zhang has been bribed by me. It's easy for me to do anything to Mu Yun. Su Qing, Qin Anlin and I have no present or future. Don't pester me anymore. Yi Liangqiu's fingers clenched the steering wheel. Su Qing was in a very good mood. She looked at her and said, Sister Liangqiu, I've told you before that I just want to play with you. Really? Yi Liangqiu stepped on the accelerator and the car quickly drove in the direction of the sea. This was an uninhabited beach. As far as the eye could see, there was only boundless seawater and sand. There was an endless sea of water and sand. There was no one there. Su Qing looked at her, of the beach. Su Qing looked at her suspiciously, but she still got out of the car. The door on her side was closed, and then the sports car started again. The sound of the tires rubbing against the sand was frightening. Su Qing was stunned and quickly turned around. The white Bentley crashed into her. She screamed and ran forward, but the beach was uneven, and she couldn't run fast. This Bentley could accelerate to 200 kilometers per hour in 5 seconds. There was no way Su Qing could outrun it. She didn't expect that Yi Liangqiu would do this. She actually wanted to kill herself. Su Qing screamed and ran with all her might. She had never been so embarrassed before. She was the little princess of ATV. No one had ever dared to treat her like this. Wherever she ran, Yi Liangqiu's car followed. Slowly, she was approached by the sea. Her body fell into the water, and she got up and ran again. Her mouth was filled with a lot of seawater, and her body was covered with mud. The original color of her white dress could no longer be seen. Su Qing cried. She sat in the water with her hands behind her back and kept moving backward. Yi Liangqiu held the steering wheel, stepped on the accelerator, and crazily crashed into Su Qing. Chapter 1283. Su Qing kept stepping back and fell to the ground. Her clothes were wet by the seawater, and her hair was covered with sand. She looked indescribably embarrassed. But at this time, she couldn't care about it. At this time, she just wanted to live. She stood up again and ran forward crazily. She kept murmuring in her heart, "She's crazy. She's crazy." The car behind her seemed to touch her leg, but the car just followed her and didn't kill her immediately. The feeling of being so close to death made her suffocate. There was fear in Su Cheng's eyes. She fell to the ground. When she came to her senses, her eyes were wide open. Yi Liangqiu sat in the car and clenched the steering wheel with her fingers. Her voice was a little cold. "This car belongs to Qin Anlin." Su Cheng's body trembled. She instantly understood what Yi Liangqiu meant. "I didn't do anything to Mu Yun." Her voice was trembling. Yi Liangqiu finally turned off the engine. When the sound of the car engine stopped, Su Cheng's whole body became weak and collapsed. She also found that she peed her pants. Fortunately, her body was wet, so it couldn't be seen. But the heat made her feel ashamed and annoyed. She watched Yi Liangqiu walking towards her step by step, like a goddess of vengeance. Su Cheng's eyes were a little hot. Her beautiful little mouth was tightly pursed, and she stared at Liangqiu, who was scared. Finally, Yi Liangqiu walked in front of her, raised her hand, and slapped her. Su Cheng's face was turned to one side, and there were a few finger marks on her white face. "If you had done anything to him, I would have killed you just now." Yi Liangqiu's voice was cold. "Don't think that I have forgotten what happened to Yi Sun. Su Qing, this world is not something you can play with." Su Qing raised her eyes. There was a touch of hurt and mockery in her eyes. "You hit me for Yi Sun?" "Yes." Yi Liangqiu squatted down and stared at Su Qing. "If I could, would really like to kill you with my own hands to avenge Yi Sun." Su Qing laughed until tears rolled down her cheeks. "Sister Liangqiu, this is a big joke." She raised her delicate and embarrassed face. "Well, I'll wait for you. Come and avenge Yi Sun." There was a touch of madness and desperation in Su Cheng's eyes. Yi Liangqiu narrowed his eyes and grabbed her neck. "Do you think I don't dare? Sister Liangqiu Yi." "I Liangqiu," Su Qing smiled, and Su Qing smiled. "I Liangqiu." Yi Liangqiu suddenly let go of her, turned to get in the car, and started it. At this time, Su Cheng was still able to get up and sat next to her. "Sister Liangqiu, you have to take me back." Yi Liangqiu's voice was full of patience. "Su Qing, you peed your pants. Don't think that I don't know." Su Cheng's expression froze, and she stared at Yi Liangqiu. "Sister Liangqiu, you know?" Yi Liangqiu closed her eyes, and after a while, she looked at Su Qing and asked seriously, "Su Qing, do you want to go to the mental hospital to have a check?" "I wanted to kill you just now, but you can still call me Sister Liangqiu. I don't have any IQ." Su Cheng's voice was very soft, and her face was innocent. Coupled with her embarrassment, she looked very pitiful. "I know that Sister Liangqiu wouldn't hit me. She just wanted to scare me, right?" Yi Liangqiu looked at Su Qing. and she really couldn't get angry. Go to the sea and wash yourself clean before coming back up. Her voice was still cold. Chapter 1284. Su Cheng was very obedient. She opened the door and got out of the car. Then, she went to the deeper part of the sea, took off the panties under her skirt and threw them away. Then, she washed her face and prepared to get into the car. But when she looked up, she was dumbfounded. Where's the car? Where's the car? The white Bentley had already driven a few hundred meters away. She couldn't catch up with it even if she flew. Su Cheng followed behind and ran hard. Sister Liangqiu, wait for me. However, the car was getting further and further away, leaving only a small white dot. What the hell? Su Cheng frowned. She kicked the seawater and sat down angrily. She forgot that she didn't have panties. She didn't know what to say when she sat down. She suddenly jumped up, and there was a piece of seafood on her butt. Then, Su Cheng cried. With tears in her eyes, she screamed in pain. The little princess of the ATV was thrown into the sea just like that. She pulled twice, but the seafood refused to let go. So, the little princess of the ATV walked towards the shore with the seafood on her butt. She cried as she walked. After walking for 2 hours, it was getting dark, and they had only walked about 2 kilometers. A white Bentley stopped by the side of the road. At that moment, Su Cheng felt as if she had seen a family member. With tears in her eyes, she opened the door and got into the car. Then, she raised her butt. Sister Liangqiu, the fare. Yi Liangqiu looked at the little crab. The little guy was still holding the tender meat tightly. She took the little crab down expressionlessly and carefully put it into the glove compartment. Mu Yun should like this. Su Cheng kept screaming in pain. Sister Bingqiu, be gentle. It hurts. Yi Liangqiu gave her a tissue. Stop the bleeding. She frowned again. It's the same. Su Cheng, you'd better get it checked. It's not good to have semen. Su Cheng sat down and felt a burning sensation all over her body. She forced out a sweet smile and said, Sister Liangqiu, I don't have any semen. I think I'm just right. I'm quite cute. Yi Liangqiu was disgusted. It seemed that Su Cheng was only 1 year younger than her, but she was still a giant baby. Without another word, she drove Su Cheng home. When they arrived at the Su residence, Su Cheng didn't get out of the car immediately. Instead, she pointed at the house and said sweetly, Sister Liangqiu, I live here. Do you want to come in and sit? Her face was innocent and pure, but Yi Liangqiu couldn't stand it. She coldly said, no need. At this time, night had fallen, and the Su residence was illuminated by the lights. It was resplendent and magnificent. Just by looking from the outside, one could imagine the prosperity inside. Her rejection made Su Cheng look a little disappointed. After a while, she softly said, then I'll go back first. Sister Liangqiu, goodbye. Su Cheng's butt was hurt by the seafood. Her walking posture was a little weird, but it was also inexplicably funny. How could Yi Liangqiu not know that she had been pretending to be cute in front of her? In fact, she had planned to take revenge on Su Cheng for Yi Sun. But as time went by, the hatred was not so strong. Su Cheng would often appear in front of her and play dumb. She didn't show any malice. Even when she hit or scolded her, she didn't fight back. She was like a little wife. Yi Liangqiu didn't know what to do with her. Maybe this was the best thing about Su Cheng. Yi Liangqiu sat in the car and looked at the black carved door of the Su residence. Suddenly, she felt a sense of familiarity. Ching ching. Mom is here. Chapter 1285. A loving voice rang beside her ears. However, there was no one around. Yi Liangqiu covered his ears, blocking out the sound that came from an unknown place. She did not know what was wrong with her. All she knew was that she was afraid of this voice. She raised her eyes again and looked at the mansion in the twilight. It was like a monster, a voice in her heart, had returned. Was this her old home? Yi Liangqiu was stunned. She got out of the car and ran to the cherry tree in front of the gate. There was a box buried there. She instinctively knew that it was there. She took the tools from the car and dug with all her might and determination. She dug until she found a metal box. Brushing away the moist soil on it, she sat down and opened it gently. There were 2 pieces of paper inside. One of them had Su Cheng's name written on it. The other one had Qin Anlan's name written on it. Her hands began to tremble. Su Cheng, Qin Anlan, they had grown up together. Ching Ching, someone was calling her name again. She gasped for air. Everything was white in front of her. She could not see anything clearly. A gentle voice rang out. "Miss, what's wrong?" That voice pulled her back to reality. Yi Liangqiu snapped out of her trance and looked at the person who looked like a rich lady. She recognized that it was Mrs. Su. Mrs. Su was a very loving woman. She looked at Yi Liangqiu and recognized her as well. Her expression was indifferent. "Oh, it's Miss Yi." She could not be blamed for not liking Yi Liangqiu. She was happy with the marriage between Su Cheng and Qin Anlan. However, the newspapers were always reporting about the affairs between Qin Anlan and Yi Liangqiu. Naturally, she would not like it. Yi Liangqiu's gaze was locked on Mrs. Su's face. After a while, she said softly, "Yes." She got up with the box and walked towards her car. Mrs. Su then realized that she had dug a hole under the tree in front of her house, and Yi Liangqiu's car looked familiar. Later, she remembered that it was Anlan's car. It seemed that the relationship between them was not clean. Mrs. Su instinctively disliked it, but this was for the sake of her daughter. Ching Ching liked Anlan and would always call him Anlan Gu. At present, this woman before her was Ching Cheng's love rival. Naturally, she would not hold back. Mrs. Su stopped Yi Liangqiu. Her tone was polite but a bit sharp. "Miss Yi." Yi Liangqiu turned around and looked at Mrs. Su. In front of her, there was another burst of white mist, and she couldn't see anything clearly. Mrs. Su's voice continued. "Ching Cheng and Anlan have a very good relationship. Miss Yi is also a famous person. I believe she would not do anything to harm her reputation, right?" Yi Liangqiu finally got a good look at Mrs. Su and felt that she was a stranger. She smiled faintly and said, "President Qin seems to be single. And these words shouldn't be said by Mrs. Su to me." After saying that, she turned around and got into the car. She did not have the courage to look at Mrs. Su again. Her heart was filled with sadness. She didn't want to think about what was behind it. She instinctively wanted to escape. Seeing her leave, Mrs. Su only thought that Yi Liangqiu was feeling guilty. Elegantly returning to her car, Mrs. Su's voice was soft. "Drive in." The driver drove the car into the Su mansion. As soon as Mrs. Su got out of the car, Su Cheng, who had already changed her clothes, rushed over and said in a soft voice, "Mom, you came back from playing cards." Mrs. Su looked down at her little daughter and said, "Where's your dad?" "Dad has come back. He is playing chess with Anlan Gu in the study." Su Cheng stuck out her tongue. Chapter 1286. Normally, Mrs. Su would feel relieved. However, her face was not looking too good. She pulled Su Ching over and reprimanded her. Ching Ching, how was your relationship with Anlin? Su Cheng's gaze froze. She then looked at Mrs. Su cautiously. Mom, why do you ask? Mrs. Su's voice sounded displeased. Speak properly to Mom. Su Ching blushed. It was pretty good. Isn't Anlin Gu in our house? Mrs. Su's face turned serious. When he came to our house, I thought he was in a relationship with your dad. Since he came to our house, did he even say a few words to you? At most, he just touched your head. Did Ching Ching eat? After a pause, Mrs. Su continued. Even now, he hasn't entered your room, right? Su Ching lowered her head. Mom, Mrs. Su looked at her with a look of disappointment. Just now, I saw Yi Liangqiu outside. She chased him all the way here. Ching Ching, if you don't take action, your Anlin Gu will belong to someone else. Su Ching looked at Mrs. Su and asked slowly. Mom, you saw her. Yes. She looks even better than in the movies. However, she doesn't seem to be in a good mood. Mrs. Su thought about it and pinched Su Ching. Be more careful. Otherwise, your boyfriend will be snatched away. Su Ching fell into deep thought. Mrs. Su looked upstairs and mysteriously took out a bottle of red wine from the wine cabinet. She placed it in Su Cheng's hand. This wine is very strong and has a strong kick. Pour a glass for Anlin later. There was a strong hint in her words. It was impossible for Su Ching not to understand. She looked at her mother hesitantly. At that moment, Su Shixian and Qin Anlin came down from upstairs. Mr. Su smiled. What are you two talking about? Mrs. Su smiled. Ching Ching just came back. I was just asking her. As he spoke, he motioned for Su Ching to bring the wine over and poured a glass for Qin Anlin and Mr. Su respectively. Ching Ching, why aren't you drinking? Mrs. Su asked with a smile. Su Ching stuck out her tongue. It's not convenient for me. This child. Mrs. Su ignored her and talked to Qin Anlin. After this meal, Qin Anlin drank some wine, so naturally, his whole body was heated up. When they arrived at Su Cheng's room, Mrs. Su winked at her. Su Cheng took it, closed the door, and helped him to the bed. Qin Anlin fell heavily to the ground. Then, his fingers began to tug at his collar. Inexplicably, it was very hot. He was also a person who had seen thousands of flowers. How could he not know his current situation? Tilting his head, he looked at Su Cheng's beautiful face. It turned into the face he was familiar with. Yi Liangqiu. You're back. He pursed his lips into a smile and lay down. Come, let me hug you. He was drunk and seemed to want to sleep. If he could hug her, he would sleep better. Su Ching adjusted her phone and pulled down her dress, revealing her white shoulders. Her petite body leaned into Qin Anlin's embrace and adjusted the angle of her kiss. Her expression was one of disgust, but she tried her best to look happy. After taking a few wonderful photos, she sent them to Yi Liangqiu. After that, she stuffed a pillow into Qin Anlin's hand and slept on the sofa. She had no interest in Qin Anlin. However, she was looking forward to seeing Yi Liangqiu's reaction when she saw those photos. Would she be angry? Would she bring her to the beach again and play the death game again? It was so exciting and fun. Chapter 1287. When Qin Anlin woke up, he saw Su Cheng's enlarged face. Shenin grunted and laid down flat. Then, he carefully felt his own body. He was an experienced man. Naturally, he could tell if they had done it or not. Su Cheng was lying on the side, looking happy. Anlin Gu, we did it. Qin Anlin glared at her for a long time. Then, he rubbed his eyes. Ching Ching, stop fooling around. Thinking about it, the alcohol he drank last night was a little strong, but it was not a village drug. How could he not know if they had done it or not? This was probably because Mrs. Su and Mr. Su had been waiting too long. Actually, Qin Anlin didn't quite understand. His reputation wasn't good, so why did Mr. Su and Mrs. Su like him and want to marry Su Qing to him? He would not be a good husband, and they could not fail to know that. So, the only possibility left was a relationship of benefits. In comparison, Qin Anlin felt that Su Qing was more honest and cute. At least, she had never plotted against him after spending so much time with him. Even if they were to sleep on the same bed, he would not have to worry about having another child. This was one of the reasons why he could peacefully create a scandal with Su Qing for the past few years. Su Qing giggled and said, Anlin Gu, I sent the photo to Sister Liangqiu. Qin Anlin got up and asked casually, what photo? Our bed photo, Su Qing said matter-of-factly. I'm so happy. I got rid of another love rival. Qin Anlin's movements slowed down. Finally, he buttoned up his shirt and frowned. Qing Qing, why did you do this? Su Qing raised her little face and hugged the blanket as she sat up. Because I like Anlin Gu. Qin Anlin's gaze was unfathomable. Su Qing looked at him with a little fear and shrank back. Qin Anlin narrowed his eyes. Really? If you really like me, I also lack a wife. As he spoke, he began to unbutton his shirt. Then let's do it first. Su Qing didn't move at first. She just looked at Qin Anlin. She probably didn't believe that he would do it for real. Only when she was pinned under his body did she believe what he said was true. Anlin Gu, I was joking. Su Qing stammered, we're fine like this. Qin Anlin stared at her and chuckled, really? But if you spend so much effort to get rid of your rival, it will make me misunderstand. His eyes were so sharp that Su Qing almost thought that he had seen through something. After a while, she pushed him away and he didn't stop her. I just saw that you like Pei Chi-Chi. I think that Yi Liangqiu has ulterior motives for Anlin Gu. I just want her to give up. Su Qing pouted. Anlin Gu, I'm helping you. Qin Anlin's gaze was fixed. Then can you help me get Tang Yu's wife? Su Qing glared at him. Anlin Gu, I really like you. Who are you trying to fool? Qin Anlin said coldly. He had already gotten off the bed and walked over to wash himself. He left before the two Su elders got up. Otherwise, no one would look good. Su Qing followed behind him. Are you angry? Qin Anlin looked at her. What do you think? With that, he went downstairs. Su Qing stood at the stairs and shouted at him, she doesn't belong to you. Chapter 1288. Su Qing couldn't say anything. She just stared at Qin Anlin. Qin Anlin smiled at her and said, don't do this again. There's nothing going on between Yi Liangqiu and me. Su Cheng's breath caught in her throat. Nothing. Yi Liangqiu gave birth to a child because of you, and you say there's nothing going on casually. Su Qing pursed her lips. Her heart ached a little. And this kind of pain was not known to others. It was the most obscure pain in her heart. She called out to Anlin Gu softly. Qin Anlin looked at her. Finally, she said, Anlin Gu, it's nothing. It's nothing. It's just that you deserve to die. Qin Anlin walked out and got into his car. He immediately started the engine. He didn't slow down until the car was out of the Su house. He smoked a cigarette and put it on his lips. There was an indescribable frustration in his heart. He couldn't tell what it was. Finally, he drove the car to the front of King Entertainment's building. It was only 8:00. There was still an hour before work started. Besides, Yi Liangqiu might not necessarily come. He sat in the car and smoked. After a while, he picked up his cell phone and dialed Keim's number. Telling Jia to ask Yi Liangqiu to come to my office at 9:00. Keim was a little hesitant. What if Miss Yi has a job? Qin Anlan's eyes were a little bloodshot. Then tell her to reject all of them. Get your ass over here right now. Keim had never seen President Qin so angry. He said yes in a low voice and hung up. On the other side, Qin Anlan held the cigarette and finished it fiercely. He went to the office and waited for 2 hours before Yi Liangqiu came. It was 10:30. Very well, she had never listened to him. When the door was pushed open, Qin Anlan looked at Yi Liangqiu. His eyes were still a little red. Yi Liangqiu closed the door, leaned against the door, and looked at him lightly. President Qin, if it's a private matter, I don't think it's necessary to talk about it. Qin Anlan interrupted her, it's business. Yi Liangqiu was slightly stunned, but she still walked over. She sat opposite Qin Anlan and looked at him. He was agitated, which was rare for him. There were already more than 10 cigarette butts in the ashtray in front of him. Qin Anlan looked up and met her eyes. After a long time, he said in a hoarse voice, the company has decided to send you to the United States to study. In the future, your focus will be Hollywood. The resources won't be bad. Yi Liangqiu wasn't surprised because Ying Jia had secretly revealed it to her before. However, Ying Jia had said that President Qin hadn't decided yet because her position in the country was stable. President Qin was also a little hesitant. At this moment, he suddenly decided. She vaguely felt that it had something to do with the photos that Su Qing had posted last night. Because of Su Qing. Yi Liangqiu looked down. Qin Anlan, are you sure? He looked at her. This is the company's decision. Isn't it your personal decision? Her attitude was also strong. Qin Anlan pursed his lips and said unhappily, Yi Liangqiu, watch your attitude. Yi Liangqiu smiled lightly. President Qin, do you think I should care about these things? His heart, slowly, sank bit by bit. Yi Liangqiu had never been an obedient person. I returned to the entertainment industry, I returned to King Entertainment purely for the money. She said to him bluntly. Not for you, President Qin. She had probably suppressed it for too long, and now she had to get it out. Chapter 1289. President Qin. Anything between you and any woman has nothing to do with me, including who you sleep with. Yi Liangqiu smiled and sent him the photos on her phone. You probably haven't admired Su Cheng's photography skills, have you? It's great. Qin Anlan's phone on the table rang a few times. He picked it up and saw the photos she had sent. Or rather, they were photos taken by Su Qing in bed. People who weren't there would never doubt that they had sex. They would definitely think that they had. He looked at them for a while and deleted the photos. President Qin, I'm sorry. I sold the photos of your fiancé to the media. It's not expensive, just $5,000 each. She smiled charmingly, but there was no smile in her eyes. Only she knew how sad it was. He wouldn't know that she couldn't sleep the whole night looking at these photos. After looking at these photos, she finally understood what it meant to give up. She knew that her little thoughts in the past were just a mistake and a joke. Really, all these years, with so many women coming and going, she had never encountered such an unbearable situation. In the end, it was Su Qing who gave her a harsh wake-up call. Some people don't deserve to be loved. Because you don't exist in his heart at all. Qin Anlin narrowed his eyes and looked at her in disbelief. He gritted his teeth. Yi Liangqiu, how dare you? There's nothing I wouldn't dare to do. She stood up slowly and placed her hands on both sides of the table. At this moment, her entire being was imposing. And all her aura was cultivated by him. All the fame and status that she had was given by him. But now, she was using it against him. Really, it was ironic. Qin Anlin narrowed his eyes and looked at her. He smiled lightly. Very well. Yi Liangqiu's body leaned forward, and their faces were very, very close. It was a little ambiguous, but only they knew that both of them were filled with murderous intent. At this moment, Kaim happened to come in. Seeing them like this, he thought that they were kissing and quickly closed the door. Even so, Qin Anlin still roared, "Get lost." Yi Liangqiu appeared to be much calmer. She leaned closer to him, so close that he could smell the cold fragrance on her body. Her lips parted slightly. "President Qin, I'll be waiting for you to freeze me. By the way, I'll be going back in a while. The people who are frozen don't have any jobs, right?" There was a hint of mockery in her tone. Damn it. Damn it. Ever since Qin Anlin took over King Entertainment, Yi Liangqiu was the one he supported the most, and also, the one he hated the most. She wasn't afraid of him at all. The "you" that came out of her mouth was a mockery of him. From the bottom of her heart, she despised him. Qin Anlin's pupils contracted. He looked at her closely and then slowly said, "Do you really not care? No one would be willing to give up after standing at the top." Yi Liangqiu was an A-list celebrity, a celebrity. How could she give up just like that? It doesn't matter. She looked indifferent. It doesn't matter if President Qin freezes me for a year or 10 years. She leaned closer to him and spat out word by word, "I'm a leaf, a cold, an autumn, and a cold, and I don't want to do it anymore." This was the first time someone dared to challenge him like this. Qin Anlin closed his eyes. As long as you don't regret it. Chapter 1290. Kaim was trembling on the other end of the line. It was a small matter that Miss Ye's work was scheduled for a year later, but the penalty fee was astronomical. It would add up to more than $1 billion, and King Entertainment had to foot the bill. To put it more bluntly, it was President Qin who had to foot the bill. Kaim's heart and soul were trembling. Yi Liangqiu was an A-lister in the entertainment industry. She had 78 million followers on Weibo. Why did President Qin have to do this? Why did he have to be angry with a little girl and with money? Why did he have to be angry? Qin Anlin hung up the phone forcefully. At the same time, the building of King Entertainment shook thrice. Yi Liangqiu smiled and lowered her eyes. President Qin, we'll never meet again. She left just like that. She opened the door and left without looking back. There was no reluctance, nor did she plead with him. Qin Anlin looked at the closed door. It was as if he had returned to that night a few years ago. She had come to the apartment to look for him and bumped into him and Shen Lian. She had been the same. She had left without saying a word. Now, her feelings, he didn't want to think about it. From the beginning, he had refused to have feelings for her. She was the only person he could hug and sleep soundly with. Hence, he didn't want to fall in love with her. Falling in love with her was equivalent to giving himself over completely. Qin Anlin wasn't willing. But when she left this time, he felt Yi Liangqiu's despair. She had really given up on him. Thinking about it, after seeing him and Su Qing in bed with her own eyes, how could she not give up? Good thing. Qin Anlin smoked. He felt that the cigarette today was especially bitter. He couldn't help but curse. Then, he smashed everything on the table, in the cabinet. The office was a mess. There were broken pieces everywhere. There wasn't even a corner. When Kime came over, it was like a typhoon had passed through. He said cautiously, Miss Yi has already left the company. Do you want Jia to talk to her? Maybe she will change her mind. Qin Anlin's eyes were cold. No need. If she wanted to leave, then she should leave. Go far away, and it would be best if she could come back after a few years. But this time, she did not ask for it back. There were some things that even Qin Anlin couldn't control well. What a cute separator. In the second month after Yi Liangqiu left, he found himself lying on a speedboat after a hangover. He remembered that he was with Su Cheng and had a drink. Later, Shen Lian came to find him. He couldn't remember what happened after that. When he woke up, he saw Pei Chichi in front of him. Pei Chichi was wearing a wedding gown. Wasn't she married? Why was she with him? Why would she ask if he was sober? His body was very hot, and he instinctively knew that he had been drugged. He thought that Su Cheng was just fooling around and didn't dare to do anything. But when he woke up, he vaguely felt that all of this had something to do with Su Cheng. He and Pei Chichi fell into the sea together. Pei Chichi lost her memory, and he became her husband. Her nominal husband. She didn't love him. Even after losing her memory, she didn't love him. After trying for a month, she couldn't accept him, so they slept in separate rooms. Qin Anlin saw Yi Liangqiu again a year later. He returned to B City and didn't leave for 2 days because he was afraid that Tang Yu would find out. When he left, he saw Yi Liangqiu at the airport with a man and a 5 or 6-year-old boy. Chapter 1291. Qin Anlin just watched like that, his gaze landing on her. The young man put his hand on her shoulder. Then, he carried the child with one hand and hugged her with the other. The family of 3 looked happy and harmonious. It was true. Very good. Qin Anlin chuckled. She was really good. She was living a good life. It turned out that she was willing to retire from the entertainment industry because she wanted to live a peaceful life. It was good. Qin Anlin lowered his eyes. After a while, he opened them again and met her eyes. She was on the ladder over there, and he was here. Their bodies passed each other, and then they gradually drifted apart. Qin Anlin didn't greet her. He just looked at her coldly. Yi Liangqiu did the same. From the day they broke up, they didn't need to be polite to each other anymore. However, at this moment, he felt a sense of anger from being deceived. She already had someone else. Why did she pretend to be sad and angry about Su Cheng's matter? Just as their eyes met, there was too much pain in his eyes that she couldn't understand. Even he couldn't understand, it was deeply engraved in his heart. Dr. Lin also saw him and asked Yi Liangqiu in a low voice, "Do you need to say hello?" She didn't feel comfortable at first, so she didn't reject him when he carried her. However, in the man's eyes, there was a hint of warmth. Dr. Lin knew that man. He was Qin Anlin, the president of King Entertainment. Mu Yun was his son. Dr. Lin carefully pressed Mu Yun's face against the side of her neck, so that Qin Anlin couldn't see it. It was up to Yi Liangqiu to say it or not. Yi Liangqiu pursed her lips and looked up at Dr. Lin. After a while, she said softly, "Let's go." So, they walked side by side slowly and passed by Qin Anlin. Some things, once missed once, would be missed forever. She couldn't tell if she had any expectations for him after that, but she knew that after seeing those photos of Su Cheng, she decided not to. Because she couldn't stand the thought of another woman appearing by his side at any time. She wanted love to be single-minded, not to say that he was charity, she and others to share. Gradually, they went further and further away. Chin Anlin arrived at the underground parking lot and felt that the lights in the parking lot were particularly dim today. It wasn't until he sat in the car and old Zhang spoke to him that he came back to his senses. I just bumped into someone I know. Although it was the middle of the night, old Zhang was still in high spirits. Young master, I saw Miss Yi just now, and she even brought a child. Looking at this child, I'm afraid Miss Yi has already hidden her marriage. Chin Anlin pursed his thin lips and scolded, you talk too much. Old Zhang didn't dare to continue. He shut up and drove. However, Chin Anlin felt as if a stone had been thrown into his heart, and he couldn't calm down for a long time. Moreover, there was a fishy sweetness in his mouth, and he swallowed it. Old Zhang drove the car to the destination, and Chin Anlin came out 2 hours after the appointment. When he came out, it was already 1:00 at night. His original plan was to return to New York immediately, but he changed his mind while sitting in the car. He called Yi Liangqiu's phone. Are you free? Let's have a cup of coffee together. On the other side, Yi Liangqiu was still awake. She had just settled Mu Yun, and Dr. Lin was still there. She looked at Dr. Lin and covered the phone. Chin Anlin. She didn't cover it tightly, and Chin Anlin heard. A man. Was it that man? Chapter 1292. A man's instinct told him that the person talking to her was a man, and it was the man he had seen earlier today. He chuckled. Forget it if it's not convenient. There's nothing inconvenient about it, Yi Liangqiu said quickly and asked for the address. Dr. Lin watched her take the car keys and said worriedly, I'll drive you. Yi Liangqiu shook her head and refused. No need, I'll drive myself. She paused. Don't go back tonight. Sleep in the guest room. She had known Dr. Lin for a long time and he would sleep here occasionally because of Mu Yun, so there was nothing wrong with it. Dr. Lin nodded. Before she left, he suddenly patted her shoulder. Call me if you need anything. Yi Liangqiu smiled at him and turned to leave. Dr. Lin looked at her back and chuckled. This was the most beautiful Yi Liangqiu he had ever seen, the most authentic Yi Liangqiu. Chin Anlin was meeting Yi Liangqiu in a private capacity. By the time she arrived at the cafe, it was already late at night. The coffee he ordered was already cold. Fortunately, the weather was hot, so it wasn't cold. Yi Liangqiu took a small sip and said faintly, Do you want to catch up, Chief Chin? They hadn't seen each other for a year. It wasn't because she didn't appear at King Entertainment, but because he wasn't in Beast City. Although she wasn't around, there were always people who would tell her about the gossip. For example, Su Cheng. Su Cheng said that Chin Anlin had another woman outside. Su Cheng said that Chin Anlin only returned to Beast City once in a while. But these were all things that Su Cheng had said, and Yi Liangqiu had never been at ease. Now that she was sitting face to face with him, she felt like she was in a trance. Are you all right? He took a sip of coffee and put down the cup in his hand, asking her calmly. Yi Liangqiu didn't drink. She just rubbed the cup with her fingers. Her stomach wasn't good, so she couldn't drink anything cold. If she did, her stomach would hurt. However, he did not know. Or maybe he knew but didn't care. She remembered that she had reminded him before. Pretty good. What about you? Chin Anlin didn't answer her question directly. Instead, he continued softly, Have you been together for a long time? How old is the child? Yi Liangqiu's fingers paused. She understood that he was asking about Dr. Lin and Mu Yun. Lowering his eyes, he said, Yeah, we got together a few years ago. The child is 4.5 years old now. She was 1 year off. Qin Anlan's expression changed. He suddenly leaned forward and moved closer. He looked at her brows and asked through gritted teeth, "You clearly have a man. Why did you still sleep with me that time?" That time. That time. Yi Liangqiu held the cup with her fingers and her smile faded. At that time, I wasn't with him yet. Furthermore, it was so long ago. There's no need for President Qin to bring it up again. No need. Qin Anlan repeated himself. After staying silent for a long time, he said, "Yi Liangqiu, I'm married." What? She raised her eyes and looked at him. Her pupils contracted violently and her fingers that were holding the cup trembled slightly. She thought that she wouldn't be surprised by such news. Su Qing had told her many times that Qin Anlan was with someone else, and it was true love. True love. Is it? Pei Chi. Yi Liangqiu asked softly. Chapter 1293. She's Tang Yu's wife. Isn't she afraid of retribution? She stared at his eyes, not letting go of his expression. Qin Anlan smiled faintly. She has forgotten everything. She only remembers me now. Yi Liangqiu lowered her eyes, her long eyelashes trembling. She doesn't love you, does she? But I love her. Qin Anlan smiled bitterly. When I'm with her, it's like returning to... He didn't finish his sentence and suddenly paused. But Yi Liangqiu caught his hesitation. She looked at him and asked word by word, "It's like returning to the time when I was your sleeping pill and pillow, right?" She looked at him. Qin Anlan, do you need this feeling, or does she need it? Have you really loved her? Or anyone else? Have you ever thought about her willingness? She asked him back with a little agitation. After asking, she drank a cup of coffee. It was so cold that her heart was about to freeze. Qin Anlan pursed his lips. Yi Liangqiu, she is different from you. She raised her chin. What's different about her? Is it because you love her more than usual? Suddenly, for some reason, Qin Anlan said, I have never had sex with her. Very pure. A very touching fairy tale. Yi Liangqiu smiled coldly. And President Qin doesn't need to tell me about this. She got up and walked to the entrance of the cafe. She cried because she didn't expect him to say this to her. He said that he loved someone else and was willing to be with her even if they didn't have sex. Yi Liangqiu wiped her tears. She laughed at herself. She laughed at herself. She laughed at how she had never been anything in his heart. She actually came to see him so late at night. There was still a glimmer of hope in her heart. She hoped that he could say that what Su Qing said was not true. It turned out that it was all true. Just as she was full of coffee, an arm caught her. She was dragged into a deserted passageway. It was dimly lit and there was no one there. There was only the dark night, Yi Liangqiu, and Qin Anlan in front of her. You are married, she whispered, looking up at him. Her eyes were watery, dazzling in such a night. Her beauty was so dazzling that it made one's heart ache. Yes. His voice was deep. In fact, Qin Anlan didn't know how to express himself to her. Only he knew in his heart that in the past year, it might not have been because he wanted to fulfill Chi-Chi's wish, which was why he didn't force himself to have sex with her. In fact, in his heart, he was somewhat resistant. He actually resisted having sex with the woman he liked. Even he himself felt that it was inconceivable. But he really, really liked her. This could not be doubted. However, when he was facing Yi Liangqiu, he had an even deeper impulse. The pure bestiality of a man wanted to explode on her. Moreover, she was wrong. Sleeping with Pei Chi made his sleep worse. Pei Chi wasn't his sleeping pill, nor was she his pillow. They were more like a fake couple who shared a strange bed. However, he still stubbornly refused to give up. Even when he saw Yi Liangqiu's family of 3, he directly told her that he was married. Her reaction was beyond his expectations. His body trapped her between his arms and the narrow wall. If he lowered his head, he would be able to see her eyes. Chapter 1294. Her body trembled lightly as she looked up at him. She didn't avoid his gaze. Qin Anlin, I'm not unhappy, nor am I happy. She smiled. Have you forgotten? We're strangers who have nothing to do with each other. He had long forgotten that she used to be in his kitchen, wearing his shirt, making breakfast for him, making lunch for him, and making the bed for him. He would sit on the bed and pat the spot next to him, asking her to sleep with him. At that time, it was as if he was summoning a puppy beside him. God knew that she hated being treated as a pet the most. But at that time, she felt very happy. He was the one who didn't want her. Why did he have to tease her now, after he had someone else? Her smile deepened as she looked at him. I have no reason to be unhappy. I've been married for a long time. You've been married for a long time. He looked at her. Do you have a child after marriage? No matter before or after marriage, it won't be President Qin's child. She sneered. Don't tell me that President Qin made me take the morning after pill after that time with me. She looked at him and smiled. Do you want me to explain the meaning of the morning after pill to you? Don't say it. His voice was very soft, and his body slowly let go of her. He closed his eyes slightly as if he was thinking of the past. Compared to the life he had with Yi Liangqiu in the past, his life with Pei Chi was more like that of a brother and sister. It was very safe. Even if Pei Chi took off her clothes and stood in front of him now, he could still bear it. In the past, when he was with Yi Liangqiu, he had to repeatedly emphasize to himself that it was safe for her to do so. In the end, he was the one who violated the taboo, but he forced her to promise herself that she wouldn't cross the line again. She hated him, and there was a reason for that. Qin Anlin let go of her and slowly took 2 steps back. His voice was low. You're living well now. It's the right decision for us to separate. With that, he gave her a deep look. That one glance had allowed her to understand many things. He turned and left, disappearing into the boundless dark night. Yi Liangqiu raised her hand and covered her mouth. She tried her best to hold it in and looked at his back. Qin Anlin, you idiot, you don't even know who you love. Actually, you fell in love with me a long time ago, but you always stubbornly told yourself that you can't have feelings for goods. You fool, poor thing. You live with someone else and you don't force her. Is it really because of love? If he didn't love her, he wouldn't force her. Fool, fool. Was it really good to waste time like this? Fool, I hate you. She sobbed and slowly squatted down. Between the cracks in the wall, it began to drizzle. She didn't care and just squatted there and cried. She hated him. She hated how easily he got together with someone else. Had he ever asked her if she was willing? Had he ever given her a chance? Never. A figure stood in front of her, his voice gentle. You're already so old, yet you're still crying. She suddenly raised her eyes and looked at the person in front of her in confusion. All right, don't cry anymore. Go wash your face. He pulled her up and reached out to gently wipe her tears. It's a little cold outside. Go wash up. I'll go in and order a cup of hot coffee for you. Yi Liangqiu closed her eyes. Her fingers rested gently on his waist and her face rested on his shoulder. Xingyuan, thank you. At this moment, she needed some comfort. She needed a shoulder to lean on. Chapter 1295. He watched her and her husband hug each other. She was so soft in the arms of another man, and his heart ached slightly. Once, she belonged to him. She used to be like this, crying in his arms and smiling in his arms. She also used to call him Anlin and be with him from dawn to dawn. Chin Anlin watched quietly, watched them embrace each other, watched her cry in someone else's arms. At that moment, Chin Anlin heard the sound of his heart breaking, but he didn't know if it was hers or his. He didn't know how long he watched, but he saw her sit in the cafe again. The man helped her order coffee and personally delivered it to her. He sat beside her and even placed his fingers on the back of her hand. She didn't refuse. Yes, how could she refuse? She and that person were together from the start. Chin Anlin pursed his lips. As he watched, he felt that it was meaningless. It was him, not her first. He slowly backed away and finally left. When he sat in the car, old Zhang asked softly, "Young master, are we going to the airport?" The private plane was already prepared, and the young master had been delayed for a long time. Chin Anlin pursed his lips. After a long while, he gave a faint grunt of agreement. Old Zhang immediately started the car and said, "Did you see Missy just now?" Other than Kaim, old Zhang was probably the only one who knew the best about the relationship between Chin Anlin and Yi Liangqiu. Although it wasn't said explicitly, old Zhang knew that Yi Liangqiu and his young master had lived together. At first, he thought that his young master had made up his mind because he really didn't have any women during that period of time. However, he didn't expect that such a beautiful girl like Miss Yi couldn't keep his young master's heart. In the end, it was still over. He saw that Miss Yi was with someone else. Old Zhang didn't know about Pei Chi-Chi. At this moment, he looked at his young master's face and thought to himself, "Young master must be touched. You didn't take the little girl seriously in the past, but now she doesn't want to kiss you. Are you upset?" Chin Anlin didn't speak along the way. Lao Zhang couldn't help but say, "Young master, if you really like it, as long as the man and woman are unmarried, it's not impossible." He spoke for a long time, but there was no response. Thus, old Zhang muttered again, "Actually, men and women are just like that. What does Miss Yi have with others? It's fine. Isn't young master also?" What he said after that was not very pleasant to hear. Chin Anlin knew what Lao Zhang wanted to say without listening. He opened his half-closed eyes and glared at Lao Zhang. Old Zhang did not dare to make another sound. He seemed to have said something terrible, probably that the young master couldn't accept Miss Yi belonging to someone else. But he was the one who didn't want the young lady. She was the best actress, so how could she wait for him? Dream on. Old Zhang shut up, but Chin Anlin's heart didn't calm down. As long as he closed his eyes, his mind would be filled with the scene of Yi Liangqiu throwing herself into Lin Xingyuan's arms. She had acted in a lot of love scenes. Many of them were about her throwing herself into someone's arms, and there were even real kissing scenes. However, no matter how real those scenes were, they were still acting. This time, it was real in front of him. That kind of shock shocked him. Chin Anlin's lips tightened. When they reached the airport, he got out of the car and told old Zhang, "Don't talk too much, especially in front of old madam. Do you hear me?" Chapter 1296. Chin Anlin looked at him again and didn't say anything. He boarded the private plane. In the cafe, Yi Liangqiu held the cup of hot coffee and sipped it lightly. However, her body was still cold, because the cup of hot coffee couldn't warm her body up. "Are you feeling better?" Lin Xingyuan's voice was gentle. He reached out to hold her hand and said, "If you're feeling better, go home." Mu Yun is still waiting for you. Yi Liangqiu looked up at him and said in a low voice, Lin Xingyuan, I don't want to have another child. He looked at her for a long time before he picked up his cup of coffee. Are you sure? Yes. She smiled lightly. Xingyuan, I'm a mortal after all. I can't do it. Lin Xingyuan didn't ask too much. He just smiled and said, it's good that you've thought it through. It's just that Mu Yun will have to work a little harder. Yi Liangqiu looked down and said, I'll be with him. Lin Xingyuan finished a cup of coffee and picked up the car key. Let's go. I'll take you home. She looked up and looked into his eyes. She said softly, he's married. I know. He still smiled gently, held her hand, and walked out. It was late at night, and the dew was cold. This time, she didn't break away from his hand. She just let him hold her hand. At this moment, what he gave her was not comfort, but peace. Lin Xingyuan sent her home, but he didn't stay. Instead, he drove back. Yi Liangqiu stood by the car. Xingyuan, you, call me when you get home. He sat in the car and looked at her with burning eyes. Yi Liangqiu, are you willing to try with me? He put his slender and good-looking fingers on the steering wheel and smiled gently at her. Yi Liangqiu, I'm just a doctor with an annual salary of 500,000. Are you sure? He wasn't just talking about money, he was also talking about fame and status. Lin Xingyuan was born into a family of doctors. Adding on his ancestral property, it was enough for her to have 5 children, all of whom could be fed until they were fat and plump. But, fame and status, he could not give her. She was the most dazzling star in the film industry. He couldn't give her that kind of status. So, he still had to ask her again, because he didn't want her to regret it. They were no longer impulsive children. Yi Liangqiu put her hands behind her back. She shook her head and then nodded at him. She acted like a 10-year-old girl who didn't know what to do or was frightened. Actually, she had never been in love before. Lin Xingyuan sighed, Liangqiu, tell me, are you willing? I don't lack money. And I think the days of being frozen are pretty good, she said briskly. Lin Xingyuan smiled. She understood him and what he meant. He didn't say too much and didn't ask her further. He just said goodbye and drove out of her villa. Lin Xingyuan felt that he was taking advantage of her, but he thought that if he didn't do this, he would regret it in the future. Yi Liangqiu looked at him in the moonlight for a while, then entered the main hall and slowly went upstairs. There were only 2 or 3 servants in this villa, and they were all used to it. Late at night, she walked into the children's room on the 2nd floor. Mu Yun was awake. The little boy sat on the bed and watched his mother come in. He asked softly, Mom, are you going to be with Uncle Lin? Chapter 1297. Yi Muyun's little face was a little tense. After sitting for a while, he said, I saw Dad. Yi Liangqiu was a little confused. She had never told Mu Yun about Qi Nanlin. How could Mu Yun recognize him? Yi Muyun's voice was very soft. I saw him at the airport. He looked at Mom, and Mom looked at him. Yi Liangqiu didn't know how to explain to her son. After a long silence, she said, but Mom can't take Mu Yun to see him for the time being. Little Mu Yun nodded obediently. I like Uncle Lin too. However, it would be better if that person was his father. Adults could often guess what a child didn't say. Yi Liangqiu didn't want to say too many cruel words to him. She reached out and touched his head. Okay, go to sleep. Xiao Muyun responded with an oh, and lay down obediently. Yi Liangqiu didn't go anywhere. She directly lay down beside the little body. She half held her son. She had never said that she also had insomnia. She could only fall asleep when she held Mu-yun. Insomnia could be contagious. Why not love? Little Mu-yun was already in a daze. He asked softly, "Mom, do you like Uncle Lin? Does Mu-yun like him?" "Yes." "Then Mom likes him." Little Mu-yun wanted to ask more, but he was a child after all. He always fell asleep easily. As soon as he finished speaking, he didn't say anything. Yi Liangqiu covered him with the quilt and lay down beside him. "Mu-yun, I'm sorry. I can't give Dad to you. He has someone else. He's married." Yi Liangqiu didn't sleep that night, and she was a little dizzy the next day. Fortunately, Aunt Zhang took care of Mu-yun for a day, and Mu-yun listened to her. In the evening, Aunt Zhang took little Mu-yun to a nearby square to play. This was a high-end villa area, so the security was very good. Yi Liangqiu did not have to worry. Little Mu-yun was 6 years old. He hadn't gone to school yet, but he liked to play with small balls recently. He bounced the ball not for fun, but because he liked to count while bouncing. When he counted to 1,000, the middle-aged lady sitting beside him laughed. "What a smart child." Aunt Zhang quickly smiled. Sitting there was old Madame Qin, the previous head of King Entertainment. She looked at the pretty little boy and then at Auntie Zhang. "Your grandson." Aunt Zhang wasn't too guarded. She blurted out, "It's not mine. It's my employer's child." Lady Qin looked at the little fellow again and asked casually, "What's your employer's name?" There were more than 10 families living here, and Mrs. Qin knew most of the people who could afford to buy a house. Aunt Zhang thought for a moment and said, "Miss Yi." "Miss Yi." Mrs. Qin thought for a moment. "Is it Yi Liangqiu?" Aunt Zhang said yes. She didn't know that the person sitting there was little Mu-yun's biological grandmother. Otherwise, she wouldn't have told her. The more Mrs. Qin looked at the child, the more she felt he looked like a person. Her face slowly turned livid. She liked the child, but she wasn't satisfied with the child's mother. He had a bad background, a crazy mother, and a broken family. She didn't feel comfortable hearing about it. Mrs. Qin didn't show it. Instead, she smiled. Of course Miss Ye's child is different. Aunt Zhang felt that there was something wrong with the old lady. She seemed to know Miss Yi. So she asked tentatively, "Do you know Miss Yi?" Mrs. Qin said, "She's quite famous. My daughter likes her movies. I didn't expect them to live together. What's more, she gave birth to Anlin's child." Chapter 1298. Lady Qin looked at Mu-yun and waved at him. "Kid, come here and let me have a look." Mu-yun looked at Aunt Zhang. Aunt Zhang was not on guard. She smiled and said, "Go and have a look at that grandma." Aunt Zhang did not think much of it. She just felt that the old lady in front of her and Mu-yun were fated. Mu-yun hesitated for a moment, but he still went and stood in front of Lady Qin. Lady Qin reached out and touched his little head. She said gently, "Why haven't you gone to school yet?" Mu-yun looked up and did not tell the truth. He just said, "I didn't go to school today." Lady Qin did not think much of it. She just smiled gently. When her hand left, Mu-yun's scalp hurt. He looked at the old lady in front of him, who was still smiling kindly. Tears flashed in his eyes. He looks so good. Lady Qin looked at him. He looked like Anlin when he was a child. Although they were not exactly the same, there was at least an 80% resemblance. That was why she dared to make such a conclusion. "Grandma will give you a gift next time." Lady Qin touched his little bag again. Mu-yun looked at her and said suddenly, my favorite is milk buns. Lady Qin was a little surprised. The little person in front of her looked a little cold and did not like to talk, but he was not shy at all. Lady Qin's eyes were even more loving at this thought. After returning home, Aunt Zhang told Yi Liangqiu about it. She said that she saw an old lady in the small square who liked Mu Yun. She thought that Miss Yi would feel better if she said that. But after Aunt Zhang said it, Yi Liangqiu's eyes changed. She looked at Aunt Zhang. Qin. Aunt Zhang nodded. Yes, Qin. Yi Liangqiu pursed her lips. Don't take Mu Yun out these days. Oh, Aunt Zhang said, but she did not take it seriously. It was an old lady who looked very noble and treated Mu Yun very well. Yi Liangqiu felt uneasy for several days. She guessed that it was Qin Anlan's mother, but if she took the initiative to ask, it would show that she was guilty. A week later, he finally received a call from an unknown number. Miss Yi, our madam wants to see you. The voice on the phone was very cautious. Yi Liangqiu held the phone and said indifferently, I don't know your madam. I got the wrong person. Let me talk to her. A slightly stern voice came from the other side. It was a little old, but it was full of vigor. Yi Liangqiu was silent for a while. Okay, where is it? Yi Liangqiu said. Yi Liangqiu said calmly. Yi Liangqiu nodded. 4 o'clock, is that okay? After that, she put down the phone and said to Aunt Zhang, take care of Mu Yun at home. I'll go out for a while. Aunt Zhang said, don't worry, Miss Yi. I will. Yi Liangqiu then drove out. The white Bentley drove for about half an hour to the restaurant that Lady Qin had mentioned. It was an English-style tea house, which was the favorite place for old ladies to spend time. There were many quaint private rooms, which were very suitable for talking about private matters. Yi Liangqiu was wearing black trousers and a simple white shirt. She walked straight in with the waiter. The waiter opened the wooden door. There was only a middle-aged lady in the English-style private room. She looked kind, but there was a touch of dignity in her eyes. Chapter 1299. She said lightly to the waiter, you can leave now. I'll be fine here. The waiter recognized her and smiled. Miss Yi, I'll leave first. He bowed and left. Yi Liangqiu closed the door gently and walked forward slowly. She knelt in front of Lady Qin. There was a cup of black tea and 2 bone china cups in front of her. Yi Liangqiu looked at them. It seemed that there were only the 2 of them today. She thought that Qin Anlan probably didn't know about this at the moment. Yi Liangqiu poured a cup of black tea for Lady Qin and herself. She stirred it gently. Lady Qin, the temperature is just right. You can drink it now. Lady Qin looked at the girl in front of her. She was tall and thin. She was pretty. She didn't dress up too gorgeously when she came to see her. Just now, that waiter knew you. Why? Did you come here often? Why haven't I seen you before? Lady Qin said slowly. Yi Liangqiu smiled. After a while, she said, not really. Then she knew you because of your fame. She watched your movies. Lady Qin looked at Yi Liangqiu fiercely. Yi Liangqiu lowered her eyes and smiled slightly. Lady Qin wants to remind me that everything I have is given by King Entertainment, right? Lady Qin nodded and finally took a sip of tea. You're very smart. Yi Liangqiu smiled. But Madam has forgotten. I'm a frozen female artist of King Entertainment, so I don't feel too grateful to King Entertainment. I can even say to myself and others that everything I have today was earned by myself. Lady Qin's expression wasn't gentle. she sneered. Sharp-tongued. Yi Liangqiu smiled faintly. Madam is not looking for a daughter-in-law. As a frozen artist, I really don't have to ask for your approval, so I can say whatever I want. Are you always like this? You just want to live freely. Lady Qin's tone was much calmer. Yi Liangqiu smiled again. I want to, but it's not likely. She looked at Lady Qin. Just like I want to live freely now, but Madam won't let me. Lady Qin nodded. I haven't told Anlin about this. As she spoke, she pushed a DNA report in front of Yi Liangqiu. You know what you're doing. Are you going to hand the child over to me, or wait for Anlin to come back and sue you? Do you want to give the child to me, or wait for Anlin to come back and sue you? Yi Liangqiu's eyes fell on the report. Lady Qin continued, I know that Anlin and the female artists in the company have some ambiguous relationships. If you had started dating Anlin with your current status, I wouldn't have said anything. But the child is already so big. You just entered the company then. What kind of thoughts did you have when you were with Anlin? 500,000. Yi Liangqiu looked at Lady Qin and sneered. Madam should know everything about President Qin. Why are you asking me? Lady Qin came from a prestigious family. She had never heard such vulgar words before. She couldn't stand it anymore and her body trembled. But she had good self-control and quickly calmed down. She said sternly, do you think someone of Miss Ye's status can say something like that? Status? Yi Liangqiu smiled playfully. If Madam had recognized my status, she wouldn't have met me in this way, right? Chapter 1300. Lady Qin's old eyes narrowed. Women who are too smart don't have a good ending. There's still a long way to go before I die. It's too early to talk about this, but Madam, you can think about it. She didn't stand on ceremony with Lady Qin. At this moment, it wasn't a conversation between two women, but two mothers. They were both protecting their children like mother beasts. To Yi Liangqiu, Lady Qin's behavior was taking away her child. She had long passed the age of naivety. Lady Qin had talked to her about Mu Yun without informing Qin Anlin. Even if Mu Yun returned to the Qin family, he would only have one identity, an illegitimate child. She wouldn't let that happen. Lady Qin was indeed the big boss of King Entertainment. She didn't care about a little flower like Yi Liangqiu. She pursed her lips and said in an indifferent tone, Miss Yi, everything can be clearly marked with money. For example, Miss Ye's first time is 500,000 yuan. How much are you selling my grandson, Muyun? This was the deepest insult. Yi Liangqiu didn't get angry. Instead, she laughed. Lady Qin, do you think I'll sell my child? You've even sold yourself, haven't you? To be honest, there's pleasure in selling one's body, but there's only pain in selling one's child. Yi Liangqiu smiled coldly. So, I won't sell him. She was even more rude than before. Lady Qin was so angry that she almost fainted. She pointed at her and said, You're shameless. You're a disgrace to us women. You're the shameless one. Madam. Yi Liangqiu stood up slowly and looked down at her. Madam, you've lived alone for so many years. Don't tell me you can't even distinguish between pleasure and pain. She didn't want to bother and was about to leave. But she was stopped by Lady Qin. Wait. Yi Liangqiu looked up at her. Anything else? Aren't you curious? Where is your child? Lady Qin's voice was also slightly cold. Luckily, she had already made preparations. Crispy Sleeve had said that Yi Liangqiu was very difficult to deal with and was not like an ordinary woman. Luckily, she had already made preparations. Yi Liangqiu clenched her fists. Where did you take Muyun? A safe place. There was a touch of contempt in Lady Qin's eyes. Where he should be. Yi Liangqiu narrowed her eyes. Give him back to me. Lady Qin was still sitting, dressed in luxurious clothes. Name a price, and he will be a child of the Qin family from now on. Qin Anlin is married. Yi Liangqiu looked straight at Lady Qin. With Pei Qi. How is it? Isn't it exciting? She walked forward step by step. You asked Muyun to call Pei Qi's mom, right? Lady Qin's eyes widened and she looked at Yi Liangqiu in disbelief. She pointed at her and said in a shrill voice, No, this is impossible. How could this be possible? Absolutely impossible. Anlin wouldn't be so silly. Whether it's true or not, you can ask him yourself. Yi Liangqiu's voice was even colder. You will have your own grandson in the future, so return Muyun to me. Lady Qin was still murmuring, This is absolutely impossible, absolutely impossible. After saying that, she fell to the ground with a thud. Lady Qin had a heart disease. In the chaos, Yi Liangqiu called 120, and Lady Qin was sent to the hospital for emergency treatment. Yi Liangqiu sat in the corridor of the hospital and waited. No matter what, she had made Lady Qin so angry. No matter how long it took, she had to wait outside. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.